Kia ora team, I'm Coach Ray. I'm a triathlon and marathon running coach who specialises in coaching beginner and recreational athletes to achieve their sporting as well as their health and fitness goals. In today's video, I'm going to take you through an article from a couple of researchers, Vijay Clemente Suarez and DJ Ramas Compo. They wrote an article entitled The Effectiveness of Reverse versus Traditional Linear Training Periodization in Triathlon back in 2019 that was published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. So traditional periodization for endurance athletes follows a linear type approach with the introduction of volume over time with intensity added later into the program. I thought this would be an interesting article to look at the different approaches and results. At Quick Kiwi, I follow a periodization approach of Jack Daniels, PhD, not the bourbon, but the American running coach, with a whole lot of influence from the godfather of periodization, Tudor Bompa. Now, I didn't realise he was based at York University, and if I realised that back in 2017 when I was there in Toronto for the Invictus Games, I possibly would have tried hunting him down and door knocking just to say g'day and meet such a legend of a sports science research. But I'm always keen to try out new paradigms and thought processes, but unfortunately this research has got some limitations, but I'll cover that a little bit later on. So the research placed 32 amateur triathletes randomly into one of three groups. The first group, reverse periodization group. The second group was the traditional periodization group. And thirdly, they had a control group as well. The reverse periodization group followed a 10-week training plan where the first 4 weeks were an intensity training block. The second 4 weeks were a volume training block, and that was followed by a 2-week taper. The traditional periodization group performed a volume training block for their first 4 weeks. They followed that with a 4-week intensity training block, and then they had a 2-week taper. And the control group, they just did 10 weeks of their normal training without any influence or guidance from the researchers, just so there's something to compare both the experimental groups against. The volunteers for the research were made up of 11 males and 13 females who had been training for triathlon for over a year and competed at a national level in Olympic and or sprint distance triathlon. The males on average were 27.7 years old. They weighed 70.6 kilograms on average and had an average height of 175.2 centimeters. Now the females, they averaged 26.8 years of age, an average weight of 58.5 kilograms, and an average height of 164.7 kilograms. Further to this, they listed some more details about the females. On average, they had a training volume of 7 hours per week, were completing on average 5.6 sessions per week, which supposedly has an average duration of 55.2 minutes. Now, that data I find a little bit confusing, because if they average 7 hours of training per week and an average of 5.6 training sessions per week, simple maths tells us that on average those sessions are an hour 15 long, not the 55.2 minutes. But I'll overlook that at this point. Moving on, let's have a look at the reverse periodization group. That was made up of 11 members. The ratio of males to females is not known, and they had the following characteristics. They averaged 25.6 years of age, 65.4 kilograms in weight, and 170.5 centimeters in height. Now, they had an average training volume of 6.9 hours, an average per week, an average number of training sessions of 5.5 per week, which supposedly is an average of 45.9 minutes. My maths says something else, but we'll move on. The traditional periodized group were made of 13 members. Once again, the ratio of males to females is not listed, and they had the following characteristics: an average age of 28.2, an average weight of 66.6 kilograms, and an average height of 170.5. So very similar to the reverse periodization group. On average, they had a training volume per week of 7 hours. They conducted on average 5.5 training sessions per week, and supposedly that's 46.3 minutes. Yep. Moving on, the control group, there were 8 members of this, 4 males, 4 females, so a ratio of 50-50. They had the following characteristics: an average age of 25.9, average weight of 62.4, and average height of 166.1. So very similar demographics there. On average, training volume of 7.1 hours per week, very similar to the previous groups. Average number of training sessions, 5.8 per week, very similar again. And supposedly an average duration of each session being on average 48.2 minutes, not the hour 13 that my maths works that to be. So they've got these 3 different groups. They've got 10 weeks of training to do. They're going to measure some things that they're going to be tracking. They do that at the start. They do it at the 8-week point. So after each of the 2 experimental groups have been through 8 weeks of training, and then they do it again at the end of the taper, so at the 10-week mark. So the testing they did was spread over 2 days. Day 1 included body composition, heart rate variability, or HRV, and also they tested swimming performance. They had a standardized warm-up they got everyone to do. Then there was a 50-meter sprint test, and then there was a 400-meter test as well, where the participants are trying to swim both those as fast as possible. Day 2 included a maximal horizontal jump. They got the subjects to do that twice, and whatever the best result was, they may have got them to do it 3 times, I can't remember, but whatever the best result was counted. And then running performance, a 2,000 meter time trial, trying to get the best time possible, and then they analysed blood lactate levels at the end of it. Now, both the jump and the 2K were done after a standardised warm-up as well, so that was kept the same throughout. So at this point, I'm a little bit confused, as there was no cycling performance test. It's reasonably common to use a horizontal jump as a measure of maximal lower limb power, but that's a little bit different from sustained cycling power. Now, I speculated that they may not have had access to any cycling erg type laboratory equipment, and at the end of the article, they did spell that out as a limitation. I believe they downplayed this and can't really justify any valid triathlon related results without actually testing cycling performance. The researchers classified training intensity into a 3-zone system. So they have zone 1 as low intensity, and that's roughly equivalent to my level 2 if you've been following along any of my videos or articles on my website. They have a zone 2 as anaerobic threshold, and so that's equivalent to my level 4. And then they've got zone 3 as a high intensity zone, and that's equivalent to my level 5. When the subjects completed the high intensity block of training, their training was primarily at zones 2 and 3. When they did the volume-based block of training, their training was primarily at zone 1. And unfortunately, there were no details of how the workouts were structured within those training blocks. Across the different periodization principles, there was no significant changes to body mass throughout the program. There were some changes to heart rate variability picked up in both the experimental groups, and these changes were from baseline to the end of the experiment in week 10, or from week 8 to the end of the taper period in week 10. Most likely they're due to less training load during the previous 2 weeks, with the athlete now fresher, having rested more. Swimming performance over both 50 metres and 400 metres improved for both the experimental groups, so those going through the structured periodization, whether reverse or the traditional linear. Lost my place, there we go. Showing that either periodization model works better than just doing your own thing. And so the control groups got no statistically significant improvements and changes in their performance for swimming. There was no significant difference between the experimental group's jump performance and that of the control group, and that indicates that no one was doing any jump training, so no one got better at jumping. What that means for cycling, I guess we'll never know. The traditional periodization group improved their running performance from the start through to the 8-week point, and also still improved after the taper. And those results were not reflected by the reverse periodization group and control groups, who had no improvement in their 2K run time. With the reverse periodized group though, they were able to tolerate a significantly higher blood lactate levels at the 8-week mark, but that had dropped by the end of the taper period. These results were not reflected by either the traditional periodized group or the control group. So what that sort of shows to me is that they, due to the training, they were able to perform at this level with a high blood lactate. After the taper, they were still performing at this level, but they weren't working or suffering as much due to the blood lactate being a little bit lower. So, what these results show is that periodization in general is more effective for swimming and running performance than unstructured training. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the article, I follow the methodology of Jack Daniels with a whole lot of influence from the godfather of periodization, Tudor Bomper. I incorporate this into all my training plans and coaching programs. It reflects both the time available for the build-up and also when coaching an athlete one-on-one, I work with their relative strengths and put a bit more focus on areas that do need a bit more improvement depending on what type of event they're training for. Anyway, if you'd like to view more articles of this nature, click on the links on the side or view any of my Science on Sunday articles at www.coachray.nz. Make sure you give us a thumbs up and hit the bell button to get more notifications of future articles.